You've written that the things that are often most important to us, our family, our people we love, work, career, are also the things that give us the most pain. I thought this was a really relevant, somehow, starting point for the topic of this huge existential change that might be coming in how we work. How does that sit with you?
Yeah, well, when we think about, like, what is it about AI that scares us? I think because we're afraid of losing things that we care about. And the bigger the pain, I'll often say to my clients, the bigger the pain, the bigger the arrow that's pointing exactly to the thing that matters most to you. So if you are experiencing discomfort or anxiety around AI, then it probably tells you where in your life there is something that's important to you, which has some benefit because then it also gives you some direction about where in your life you want to put your energy. Right.
Mm,
So if AI is making you feel nervous about losing your job, I mean, I think about myself as a therapist, right? Are we going to replace all of our therapists with robots at some point? Maybe, possibly. Oh, no, because my job is so fulfilling and so important to me. Human connection is actually the value that's underneath that for me, human intimacy and connection. So you dig down a little deeper, you can find your values underneath pretty much any pain. And if you don't have discomfort around it, maybe there isn't a deeper value underneath it that's being challenged or threatened in some way.
ACT therapy encourages us to actually think about what value is driving the emotion.
hmm
Why is that important for us to do, especially in the context of work?
Well, if you can think about what value is driving the emotion, then you can start to generate some behaviors that are connected to that value, right? So if the value that's generating your anxiety in relationship to something like work is, like I said, I value human connection, then now I actually have a plan for myself of what am I going to take action on today in my life? Could I actually work to develop more connection in the workplace, in my relationships, in, even in my online engagement with Morra? I can act on that value of human connection in the here and now. And that actually can bring us some sense of competency, like agency, these things that we know are really important for humans to have, like a sense of I can do something about this feeling that I'm having without it being trying to get rid of this feeling that I'm having. Because that is the other part of ACT, which is the more you try and suppress or get rid of your anxiety, it's going to rebound. It's going to get worse. It's going to pop up at 2 a.m. The thoughts are going to get louder. So you can turn that energy around, right? Turn that energy around towards your values, act on it in the here and now. And then you're doing something that is called being psychologically flexible. And that psychological flexibility seems to be probably one of the most key ingredients that we need in life to be able to adapt to change. Steve Hayes, who's the founder of ACT, did this massive study that had, I think it was over 54,000 research papers that he did a meta-analysis of to look at how is it that people change during therapy? What is the secret sauce, the ingredient, right? Even with all these different types of therapies that they're engaging in. And what he found was that almost half of the variance was explained by psychological flexibility, your ability to know what matters to you, to stay present, engaged, and act on that in the here and now. So that's what our values help guide us to.
It's not lost on me that probably having AI to help you sift through tens of thousands of research papers would make your life a lot better,
Oh, I think it is already making people's lives a lot better.
right? Yeah.
The advancement that I've seen, and at least in my field of study, which is psychological science, has been rapid and profound and really enhancing our field in the past, few years that this has really been taking off. And I've been kind of behind the scenes working with Steve Hayes a bit and some of the research projects that he's working on. And they're looking at everything from how do we individualize treatment, right? It used to be this sort of one size fits all. Like you get your diagnosis, I have generalized anxiety disorder, and then a therapist slaps on the two things that are evidence based. But when you start to tease it apart, it doesn't work for everybody. And something like AI can help you take ongoing assessments, how you're doing throughout the day, plug it in, have your therapist do some analyses with your individualized treatment, but also connect it to the research that's out there and produce a plan that is going to optimize your flourishing. That's exciting.
It is so challenging in that way, and I think it does require us to be extremely flexible, which is hard.
Yes. Yes. It requires us to do a couple of things. I think there's a cognitive bias in psychology, which came to my mind when you said that you were going to interview me about AI, which is the Dunning-Kruger effect. I don't know if you've heard about this cognitive bias. It's the cognitive bias that the less you know about something, the more likely when you talk about it, you're going to start to sound like you're an expert. So here we are. We're all kind of like going around. We don't know much about this AI thing. No one really does. It's like a ship that's being built in the water, right? So it's being built as we go. And then we're all becoming experts on it, right? And we all have these strong opinions, right and left, and, about it. So there's that danger. We have to, in this process, constantly be checking ourselves. Am I sure? Do I know that for sure? Is this true? I don't know. And be in that state of beginner's mind, which is one of these components of psychological flexibility, not believing your mind that even though your mind says you think you know something. So that's one piece of it, of being flexible. And then another piece around flexibility is our ability to tolerate uncertainty. And we know that humans and animals really dislike uncertainty, right? So when you put somebody in a MRI and you start shocking them, at predictable intervals or unpredictable intervals, the brain has a really different response to the predictable intervals and the unpredictable intervals. And it's even more painful, right? The parts of the brain that light up in response to pain are lit up even more because uncertainty is painful to us. So
Yes.
psychological flexibility helps with that too. And those are the things that show up, I think, are showing up around AI, but in particular in the workplace, because we don't know what our jobs are going to look like a year from now or 5 years from now. And those that are entering the workplace really don't know. I mean, I have two kids, like one's going into high school. What's his career going to look like? I have no clue.
None.
Yeah.
None. But I wonder if they're at an advantage in that those of us who've been around for a while and are feeling a lot of uncertainty and perhaps threat around what AI means have a lot more stories that we tell ourselves about why we in particular might be that person whose job is eliminated, or again, thinking we know it all and it's all going to be bad. What can we do about being more conscious of the stories we tell ourselves when it comes to managing anxiety around AI? Does that make sense?
Hmm. Well, I love just the languaging around story. And there's two directions I go with this. I mean, contemplative practice has for thousands of years been working with the human mind and storytelling. So sometimes I go there because we can learn a lot from secular Buddhism or secular approaches to contemplative practice about our own mind, because these are people that sit with their mind for hours on end, right? And there's a really simple practice that I will do around storytelling that has basically four parts to it. And it comes from wise speech. Wise speech is one of the components of the Eightfold Path. And I think we can look at wise speech within ourselves. So the first thing that we can do when we notice that we're telling a story, I mean, that's, gosh, already we've gotten somewhere to notice that this is a story and this isn't just the truth, right? I'm not caught in the Dunning-Kruger effect then. If I notice that I don't really know what I'm talking about. The first step is to ask ourselves, is this true? And not to ask ourselves that, and I'm going to go try and find the evidence for is it true or not, but the pause that creates. Is this true? It's sort of the old school Byron Katie. I don't know if you ever went through that
Mhm,
process of
mhm.
like, is it true? How do you know that it's true? Could you flip it? But just that pause helps us get out of the story a little bit. Is it true? The second part of wise speech, which I think really aligns with ACT, is it helpful? Sometimes we have true stories that we tell ourselves, but actually are not helpful, right? So I may be fumbling over my words in an interview, or I may have said too many ums, but if I start rehearsing that story in the interview, even though it may be true, it's not going to be helpful to me, right? So
No.
is it helpful to get into 10 years ahead right in this moment? The third one is it kind? Because a lot of the stories that we tell ourselves have this self-critical negativity bias angle to them. So it's not only AI is going to come take my job, but it's sort of like, I'm not good enough to keep up with it. Look, I can't even figure out how to use this app on my phone that uses AI, whatever it is. We add this layer of, is it kind? And then the third one, which applies so much to me and my anxiety, because my anxiety likes to show up at 2 a.m., is it a good time? Is this the right time to be having this conversation in my head about this, right? Maybe I'm in session with my client and they're talking about AI and their job. And all of a sudden now I'm into my own story about, AI and my job. That's not the right time, right? So these four questions, is it true? Is it helpful? Is it kind? Is it a good time? Is a way to step back from our story a little bit and then actually ask us what's useful to us. And when we're doing that, we're doing what in ACT is called cognitive diffusion, the capacity to defuse from our thoughts, get a little space from our thoughts. Don't believe our thoughts as truth with a capital T, but rather be able to respond in the moment most effectively to what is at hand.
As an ACT teacher, what if at some point you're asking yourself the questions and your anxiety is saying, this is the time and it is helpful?
So anxiety is not bad.
Right.
Anxiety is not good or bad. This is a functional analysis moment. This is what we call functional analysis in ACT, which is what is the utility of this energy of
Hmm.
anxiety. I have gotten super into energy. I think that that's sort of like what brings us vitality in our life force, our energy. What is the energy behind this anxiety, and how can I channel it effectively? Because when the anxiety gets so overwhelming that I am paralyzed by it, or my personal response to anxiety is run through life as if I'm running across hot coals. So I just speed through everything. I'm not as effective. But if I could notice I'm feeling anxious about this, because as we talked about, this is something I really care about. If I want to channel that energy in an effective way, it may be to approach the very things that I'm anxious about. I'm going to go learn more about AI. For me, that has been working in the arena of research where AI is being used. I'm scared of it. I need to learn more about it. And it's anxiety provoking as I do it. And the more that I do it, the more empowered I feel because I'm staying up on top of things. If I'm going to be taken down, I want to be at the front. So, in that sense, if your answer to that second question, is it helpful?
Yeah.
Then you're going to start responding to its helpfulness, but you need to do it in a way where you stay in your most centered self, even with the storm of anxiety happening around you. And that is a skill, that's a practice that we can learn as well.
You help people learn distress tolerance skills, which is a fancy way of helping people understand and not maybe run away from or act out difficult emotions and feelings. Can you explain why we all should have some distress tolerance skills up our belt, especially in the professional world right now?
Well, have you been around somebody that does not have distress tolerance?
Oh, yes, and I've worked for them.
Yeah, so that's a little indicator of, sometimes we can observe it in other people before we'd observe it in ourselves of when you cannot be with discomfort, when you can't tolerate uncertainty, when you become impulsive or you run away, you end up having a life that is really narrow or having a life that is just kind of like exploding all over the place on people where it shouldn't be exploding. And there's three tendencies that we have when something uncomfortable shows up. So we either want to run away from it,
Mhm.
or we can also hold too tight. In Buddhism, they call this attachment, right? So holding too tight to something, it's holding too tight to a rope that is unraveling, right? And the nature of our human experience is that everything is changing all of the time. Our bodies are changing in this very moment. We're having cells that are turning over. Our world is changing. The nature of impermanence is real. So holding too tight will also cause a lot of suffering. And then the third is making up stories about what's happening that aren't helpful or true. So with distress tolerance, what you are learning to do is you're first learning how to ground yourself, how to find that still center within, even sort of the eye of the hurricane, even as everything is changing around you. But then there's a whole nother aspect, which is not just tolerating distress, but expanding your zone of flexibility with distress. And that's when we move into things like welcoming your feelings, taking care of your feelings, being able to give your feelings a name, or also identifying the value that's underneath the feeling. And all of those have different practices that I work with people on.
I don't want to put you on the spot, but I don't know if you do the expansion practice with clients, but I did have this moment where I thought, if you could model for us an exercise, maybe it's an expansion practice, maybe it's something else where we take a feeling that we're having around the threat of AI. I always get it when I read an article or read a terrible statistic about how we're all going to be obsolete, and sit with it and move through it in a more healthy way.
Well, Maura, if you put me on the spot, I'm going to put you on the spot.
Okay.
We're in this together, right? So,
Yes.
would you be open to doing this with me? It's called a real play, actually. When I train
Yeah.
therapists, I don't do role plays. Like, don't bring a client to sit across from me. Bring yourself, because I want it. It's much more real, and people want to watch
I
that.
would love to be your client.
Yeah. Okay. So, tell me more about, like, if you can bring up a specific example of a time recently when you have felt this anxiety around AI, and maybe even, I mean, you're preparing so much probably for these interviews. I can't imagine it's not all over the place. But do you have a example that is tangible and you can bring
Yeah.
up? Yeah.
I'll give you two examples. The first is a really tangible example. I got an email from a platform for which I record courses, and they said that they were basically making an AI version of my course. And I could expect more details, but there was nothing mentioned about getting paid. And that made me tremendously anxious because I thought, oh, whoa, they're just going to like take my words and maybe even my image and feed it into an LLM and curtains for me.
Yeah. Okay. So we can already see the story, right? The
Yeah.
story's developing. It comes quick. This is the nature of the human mind and its capacity to create language. But before we go into the story, actually, what I would want to do with this situation, because you're even kind of in it right now, is notice the feeling state without giving it a name.
Mm.
But it's starting just like ping, I just got hit by something. An emotion just showed up for me. So notice that feeling state. And can you tell me where that is in your body and what it is like if you were describing it, like a sculpture or a painting? Like, give me the characteristics of that feeling inside of you.
It's absolutely centered in my chest and in a fast beating heart
Mhm.
and a sense of like my breathing has just it's happening in real time.
Mhm.
My breathing being really constricted. So it's like if I was a contorted figure that my chest was shrinking.
Yeah, great. So the first step is to do that.
Mm.
You'll catch yourself, you notice you're in your story. Can I find the feeling in my body? And then here's the next thing that I would want you to do in this situation is see if you can go to that feeling. You said it was contracted and contorted, right? See if you can go into that feeling and not change the feeling itself, but maybe exhale around it and create more space for it, breathing in and around the feeling. Now, if breath work isn't useful for you in this situation, you could just imagine that your chest is opening up more and more space for this feeling to be there. You're relaxing your shoulders, you're letting go of your belly. There is so much space for this feeling inside of you. Okay, so this would be the next step, which is making space for your feeling. Even as you do that, you may notice that your feeling starts to change. You may not. And that's not the goal here. The goal is to make space for the feeling. So then the next thing that I would have you do with it is to remind yourself that I'm hurting here because I care about something.
Mhm.
So, what is it that you care about that's making this course so painful, viscerally painful to think about, of your image being uploaded into some course AI?
You know, it's funny because I've thought about this example because it was so powerful for me, and I realized that it was a total anxiety about money and scarcity and what if I'm not relevant anymore? It actually wasn't really underpinned
Mm.
to a deep value that I have, which is weird because my
Mm.
work, I'm usually like very values driven in my work. I want to help people. I want to reduce shame. But this was really about I'm not going to get paid. And also like I don't matter. I'm irrelevant.
So there's an attachment quality to it. That gripping is like I'm holding on to my relevance. I'm holding on to wanting to matter, which I actually think is and can be linked to our values. If you dig a little
Hmm.
bit deeper in there, you care about being relevant because what is it that you care about? That you want to be relevant, you want to matter because I care about what?
Helping people and reducing shame.
And if you don't have that relevance, like how am I going to be able to do that? Yeah, I care about
Hmm.
helping people do things. Is there also something in there about caring just the pure the pure form of wanting to matter in this world? Like when you're like a kid and you look at your mom and you're like, "Do I matter?" And your mom's like maybe does or doesn't respond in the way that shows you do. Like, is there something about that? Like just you caring about
Oh, yeah.
yourself and your own mattering?
Yes. Yes, because it brings up a lot of feelings. I mean, I'm a woman in midlife. I'm getting older
Yeah.
also, and I have a lot of feelings around that. I have feelings about social media making me obsolete, so it triggers all those feelings.
Yeah. Yeah. So there's the story level, but then there's the underneath level. And I'm as we're talking here, people can't see me, but I just already have a hand on my heart and a hand on my belly. And I'm wondering if you can do that with me too,
Mhm.
right? So we notice the feeling, we make space for the feeling, and then we feel for the value, the heart space that's underneath this. And yes, there's an attachment, a grippiness that's driving this. But underneath that attachment and grippiness is I really care about mattering,
Mhm.
that my work matters, that I'm making an impact. And so you could even just say that to yourself internally, like, what is it that I care about that's making this so painful?
Mm.
Right. And I don't know what words, if you were to make it into a sentence, what your sentence would be.
I think it would be I care about mattering.
Hmm.
It's important that I matter.
Yeah. Yeah. Great. And then the very last thing that I would do here is then I would say, okay, so if that's something that I care about, what can I do that matters right now about this, you
Right.
know? And that action step, this was a slow progression to get here. You don't want to trump all the other stuff and just go straight to action as achievers will often do, right? There's a slowing down and pausing to get to that deeper core feeling. And sometimes we have to sift through a lot of attachment and a lot of avoidance to find it, that
Yep.
sort of gold nugget. And then from that gold nugget is where you take action. And here's Maura, who's having this constricted, tight, anxious feeling multiple times a day because she's preparing for all of these, interviews and all this information. You are head on moving into this space of AI. But what's driving that isn't a forcefulness, I'm going to torture myself. It's because I care about something. And maybe it's because I care about mattering, which is an interesting, there's actually a whole field of research around mattering, but also it's one of the core human longings that we have. We long to develop confidence. We long to belong. We long to feel like we matter. We long to have a sense of orientation in this world. And these are all evolutionary based things that every human has a desire for that can either get misdirected in their energy. Because, like, if you care about mattering, wow, you can step on a lot of people to make yourself matter, or you can get misdirected in another direction. I don't matter. I'm nothing. I'm useless. I'm a loser. Right. Or you can use that longing in a way that is really driven by a deeper sense of making a difference for yourself and for others, a more compassionate drive. And that's where I would say if we can all get our feelings enough space for us to feel, and we can start directing them towards more compassionate and effective directions, then we can use AI for the good.
Yes. But also, I think of Alice Boyes, the psychologist, she would say also to use AI more lightly. right?
Mhm.
To not make AI be AI that's
Mhm.
going to, do all the things. But wow, this is a helpful tool that maybe I'll try to not have so much emotion and investment in it.
I interviewed Brendan Kiernan, who is using AI to create something called the Museum of Tomorrow, which is this giant museum in DC where it's based on climate change, climate activism. That's not AI being used lightly. That's actually AI being like doubled down on, but AI used in a purposeful way. And one of the things that he also talked about is how he was programming AI, the worldview from which he wanted AI to operate from, because we know that worldview comes first, theory comes next, action comes next, right? So if you have the foundational worldview, he was programming it with indigenous worldview principles around harmony and interdependence and things like that. It changes the output, right? So there's also an element of like being intentional
Yes.
around all of this, right? And it's really hard to be intentional when you are so caught up in your storm of emotions, or you're so caught up in proving yourself, right? Because you've lost touch with what's important here.
When we were talking through my example, which was incredibly helpful, by the way, I was also feeling a sense of anger, which is an emotion that I think a lot of us are very uncomfortable with or very comfortable with. But I think people are probably feeling when they read these articles about what AI might mean for their work. Like we can feel angry that
Mhm.
a bunch of billionaires have created a technology that even they admit they don't know what the hell it is that might do all this. There's a sense of anger.
Yeah, good. I mean, every
Yeah.
every emotion you have evolved with a function associated with it, right? So if you didn't have that emotion, you probably didn't need it, right? So what is the function of anger? The function of anger is to protect
Mhm.
or defend, right? And so the first thing that I would say is there is a good amount of research that just naming your emotions is incredibly helpful. So when they put people in MRIs and they show them really distressing images, and they're able to say things like anger, I'm feeling fear, what they find is that the parts of the brain, the ventrolateral prefrontal cortex, the area of the brain that's involved in regulating emotions, increases. And the parts of the brain, like the amygdala, which is associated with emotional responses, especially fear and anger, decreases. So just saying I'm angry is helpful. Then we also start to look at, why am I angry? What is the function of this? And like any form of emotional energy, how can I use it wisely?
Mhm.
How can I channel my anger, that energy within my body, in a way that, like, we use fire to warm houses and we use fire to burn down forests, right? It can take over. And sometimes you do need a forceful anger to mobilize
Yes.
people, mobilize things, mobilize your teenager. I get angry. Mama's angry. Let me say, people start moving in my house when I get angry. It's a useful tool.
Yep.
And I'm not hitting people. I'm not saying things that aren't kind or truthful or, you know, inappropriate time wise, right? There's wise speech even with anger. And that's where you learn how to be with anger. What we know around suppression of anger is that if you are suppressing your anger, people still can sense that you are angry,
Right, totally.
and they actually feel a little less safe with you.
Mom is angry.
Mama's angry and she could blow any minute, right? So it's not suppressing, but it's not, just completely being swept away. This is human skillfulness at its best. How do we take all of these amazing emotions that we humans have and be really skillful and effective with them? It takes a lot of practice. It takes emotional awareness. It takes the practice of multiple times a day. I mean, even just that little thing that you and I did, if you
Mhm.
did that multiple times a day, you would develop your muscle for emotional attunement, values based attunement, and values based action. But what ends up happening is we're not practicing that. We're practicing getting angry, suppressing our anger, and then going eating a box of donuts, or getting an angry and blowing up at, our spouse that wasn't even related to the thing that we were angry at.
Totally.
So these are all skills that need to be practiced, and probably the most important skills of our future as humans that are going to be working with AI, because we need to be the ones that harness emotions and know how to use them and apply them well.
It's funny, entrepreneur Paul English, who has invented a bunch of amazing technologies, said that the way that he knows that he has a good idea is that he gets angry about something that he needs to fix.
Some of those more energizing emotions, anger, excitement, jealousy is another one that's a really good one to look at, because when you
Mm.
get jealous or envious, when I'll talk with people about that, then you have a arrow pointing to something that you want for yourself and you're seeing
Totally.
it in somebody else. So you turn that energy around and start working on that thing. If you're really jealous that your friend is like, it, whatever, killing it at CrossFit, turn that energy around and start figuring out what, exercise program you want to do.
I
So
know.
all of these emotions have really important information in them, and they can be powerful, really powerful sources of fuel that can motivate us if we don't freeze up around them or get carried away by them.
Yes. So, my last question is just a bit speculative, but if you had clients who said to you, I'm pretty sure I'm one of those people whose job is going to be going away. It could be 5 years, it could be 10. That feels like a tremendous amount of uncertainty for me to live with every single day.
Yeah.
What should I do?
Well, I'd start by not doing anything.
Hmm.
I'd start with, let's feel that together. Because even as you were saying that, felt I felt sadness. I
Mhm.
love my clients. This is the secret to being a therapist. You fall in love with every single one of your clients because you get to see the most vulnerable, human side of people. And so, in the same way that the first thing I did with you was say, just notice it. Can we just notice that feeling? And what is it? Are you feeling angry? Are you feeling sad? Are you feeling, what is showing up for you? But that it doesn't end there.
Mhm.
And if you can open up to that feeling, then you can also open up to something else, which is you're not the only one that's experiencing this.
Mhm.
There's, millions and millions of people that are experiencing will or probably know if your job is going to be a job that is going to be eliminated or changed. So we can have that common humanity around that. But now we need the skill set of behavioral stretching, flexibility, and evolution. So the field of psychology is looking a lot more to evolution and the principles of evolution to understand how change can happen. And there's three simple principles to evolution, which is number one, we need variability. So if you think about Darwin's finches and all the different beaks on all those different islands, right? How did they evolve, right? They had to have a huge variety of beaks. So with this client, I'd start to work on variability. What are the different strengths you have? What is your genius, like your genius energy? What are the things that you are good at that you love to do? And
Mhm.
could we do like a behavioral brainstorm where we put that thing on the middle of the page and we brainstorm all the different possible ways that that could show up in as big of a brainstorm as possible? So we need variability. And then the second thing we need to evolve is we need to select what works. So let's go start trying out a few things. Knowing this is happening in a year or 10 years or whatever, this is the time to go start and try. Stretch yourself a little bit. And what we know around behavioral stretching is that the worse you feel, the more that behavioral stretching helps.
That's a bummer.
I know. It's good, yeah, more room to roam. So we go and try out some things, we select what works, and then we move towards the third part of evolution, which is retention, retaining the things that are working for you, reinforcing the small steps that you're making, using your own intrinsic reinforcers of this is aligned with my values or encouragement from the inside out. And then we repeat that over and over again because yes, AI is something that is changing our lives, but that's not the only thing that's going to come and change your lives in the next 5 years. If you think back the past 5 years, all the things that came in and disrupted your life, whether it's big things like pandemics or children being born or small things like your car dying on the side of the road or whatever it is, change is a constant flow.
Right.
We get fixated on one or two changes that our mind creates stories about, like this is the scary one. But trust me, folks, there's lots of scary things ahead for you. really big, bad, scary things that are coming your way. And you can handle it if you're flexible and if you stay rooted in your values and you can ground yourself.
Dr. Diana Hill, wow, thank you.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the Wise Effort podcast. Wise Effort is about you taking your energy and putting it in the places that matter most to you. And when you do so, you'll get to savor the good of your life along the way. If you would like to become a member of the Wise Effort podcast, go to wiseeffort.com. And if you like this episode and think it would be helpful to somebody, please leave a review over at Podchaser. I would like to thank my team, my partner in all things, including the producer of this podcast, Craig, Ashley Hyatt, the podcast manager, and thank you to Ben Gold at Bell & Branch for our music. This podcast is for informational and entertainment purposes only, and it's not meant to be a substitute for mental health treatments.